Welcome to Rookie Pirate Radio, the anime and manga podcast for InBetweenDrafts.com. I'm your host, Travis Hymas, and today I'm joined by our fearless editor-in-chief of In Between Drafts, Allison Johnson.
Hello, again.
And Allie, I do say that fearless because you keep coming onto a podcast that talks mostly about One Piece.
Yeah, as he's become a part of our lore, my husband did watch the most recent episodes of One Piece, even though we have watched 15 total from season 1. So it is always around. But it's okay.
Yeah, we won't be getting too much into One Piece, admittedly, this week, but that's okay, because we have something very exciting. We have a guest. We have Kate Sanchez, the editor-in-chief of ButWhyThough.net, here to talk with us today about something that is in my blind spot. So I'm very excited. Welcome, Kate. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm very excited about this topic, and I love any time somebody asks me to talk about it.
You and I, this is our first time talking directly, but Allie connected us up because you have quite the experience with the boys love genre. You write about it quite a bit on your site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think when we look at like boys love as a genre, we have to unpack like all of the things that go into that. So I started very explicitly in yaoi, which is like the smutty versions of the MLM love stories. And then from then I went into kind of the more, there are a lot of nuances. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it. Like yaoi is the term that a lot of people don't like because it's what everybody thinks boys love, or BL, just BL is that it's always, hentai adjacent, and it's not. There's a whole breadth of types of romances, from the extremely wholesome that is more akin to like a shoujo high school romance where like they maybe hold hands at the very end, to something like a josei novel, which is more so adults living through life and trying to figure out what relationships and love and intimacy is. And then you have like the more explicit stuff, and that entire gambit, like any romance genre, just kind of exists. And I love to just really explore all of the queer stories that are in there, because at the end of the day, they are queer stories, and they're queer romances. And the cooler thing is now, because so many people are reading it, not just from a manga perspective out of Japan, but from a manhwa perspective with a lot of the webtoons and physical versions that are coming out from Korea, there is also proliferation of different types of genre tropes and usages from like fantasy, sci-fi, and horror that are coming in. Crime dramas, Yakuza stories. It's a lot.
I'm glad you led with that too, because as I said, this is a huge blind spot for me. I will confess to being a cis het, so not exactly the most exciting person in the world. And I just have not had an opportunity to really engage with those stories. Now, you've covered this genre quite a bit over the years. Have you seen it? You've mentioned that there's a lot coming in from different sources. Have you seen that proliferate a lot in the States as well, specifically, like seeing an uptick of publications and translations? Or is this still kind of fan translated and underground?
Oh, no, there's a giant. So this is the one thing that I love when somebody asks something like this, because BL, even in Japan, it's not something that's underground at all. Like there are shops dedicated to it that you can walk around in Akihabara. Like there are entire fan conventions which are just for fujoshis, which is what what women who like BL call themselves, as well as fudanshis, which is what men who like BL call themselves. And so like it is something that is actually very pervasive and very out there. And I think what we've seen happen in the US is when translation rights get picked up, it is because there is a want for it. So I don't know if you all know, but you can go to Viz, Yen, Denpa, Seven Seas, any of the manga publishers' websites, and you can submit a request for a language, for something to be translated, for them to pick up a license. And so essentially the way the manga industry works, if it's not something that's coming out of something that's already owned, like Weekly Shonen Jump or Shoujo Beat before that was sunsetted, you could, like, audiences drive manga translations in a very specific and direct way. So a lot of what has come out is being done in order to feed what is happening. there is a very specific manga publisher called Sublime, where the B and the L are capitalized. And that's actually an imprint of Viz Media, where they only publish adult BL novels. And there's some really cool ones where there's like werewolves and like Yakuza stories. And like, so to answer your question, I think there has been an uptick in getting the rights for official translations in physical form. There has been already a large digital community. So like Renta, Leshin, Tapas, Fudakiya, like there was already a digital translation space where there were official licenses coming out where you could buy whole volumes online. But now what's happening is these manga companies have realized that there is a thirst for it in the physical form as well. And this is translated to getting more Korean web stories also physically made. Tokyo Pop and Yen Press are the two that are doing it the most. So it's weird because like I wouldn't say that like it's never not been mainstream in a way. It's just always been something that was harder to get official licenses for. But in like the last 4 or 5 years, I would say, it's been everywhere. The space that is harder is when it comes to anime, because there is a lot more censorship involved in anime production than there is in the manga space. So that is the one space where like we're getting quote unquote more with something like Sasaki and Miyano, and then you have some of the offshoots like Link Click or Skate the Infinity, which were meant to be BL stories, but they weren't explicit. You can see the same thing with like Yuri on Ice. Well, that one's, yeah, that's as explicit as you could get with Japanese censors for Yuri on Ice. And then you have stuff like Promare. So all of that is to say the queerness is everywhere. It's just whether or not a company has leaned into making it explicit, and anime is the one place that struggles.
I was going to actually ask about that because I jotted down some notes because, again, I'm not totally well versed in the manga side of things, but I do try to seek out queer stories in anime. And, you know, I have things like Skate written down, even though it's not explicit, but come on, or like Run with the Wind. Yes. But in terms of mainstream, I think not so much my question, but what I'm curious about is it's less so, you know, has it become more mainstream, but more so has the kind of acceptability changed? You know, is it less, you know, written for women and more written for the queer spaces? Because again, I feel like I know so much about it only from watching a show like Sasaki to Miyano.
Yeah. And I think that like there's a valid concern of fetishization that happens when because there are a lot of straight women who write BL and consume BL, but like it's just like any other romance genre. You don't have to be the person that's about to read it, and you don't have to be the person that's about to create it. And the reason I say that very specifically is BL has been a space for a lot of people to explore their sexualities, explore their romance, their romantic inclinations, to explore what they like, what they want to do in a safer space than you traditionally see. Because the thing is, in the way that BL is mostly written by women, Yuri, which is girls love, like GL, is mostly written by men, and almost all hentai is written by men with the exception of a couple pieces. So BL has really been the only space for women to write stories and romance stories. Now there is a specific genre within BL called Bara, and that is written by gay men for gay men. And there are some differences in aesthetic style, focuses, and explicit, like how explicit pieces get. And a lot of times Bara is more explicit, focused more heavily on really, really muscled guys. But all of that is relative. So to answer your question, it's this really weird piece where I think the assumption is that BL is just straight women kind of co-opting gay culture, but they don't, a lot of people, when that's what they're thinking, they don't understand that BL is actually, there's an encouragement for everybody to read these queer love stories and find themselves in them. And for a lot of people, if you go to the BL subreddit, it is actually a lot of people who are able to find their own sexualities from within BL, whether that was realizing that they're actually lesbian, that they're bi, that they're poly, like, and their sexualities and like relationship preferences that they've explored the same way people may have done when they found like a really cool romance novel back in the day. So I don't know if that really answers your question. But that is something that has been more focused. And I think from what I've understood from queer people in the space, and being a reader myself, is just that more queer stories is always a good thing. And with the BL genre, with the BL type, and I feel weird even calling it a genre. I think it's more of a medium. Like it is just men love men's stories. Like that's it. That's the crux. And then there's genres within that. You can do so much and explore so much. And I think from what at least my understanding is that when it comes to straight people reading it or women reading it, it is just more so there just needs to be more queer stories, period. And this is a starting point and a tipping point to what you see, which what can help anime and manga and webtoons really push forward in those spaces. Predominantly because we need to remember, like, we're Americans. You know, we're not living in these countries. We're not having to deal with any sort of the oppressions in those countries. And in both Korea and Japan, that are traditionally more conservative societies, BL, MLM stories, like that has been a way for all kinds of queer folks to really explore themselves and become something more understood. And it's really weird to look at it as a jumping off point, but it's something that's been embraced in the live action form as well. So there are a lot of live action dramas, and then it's even being picked up by performance artists as well. And so, yeah, sorry that I kind of tangented off, but that's a really hard question to answer. But like, I also wanted to contextualize it. Like, if you are straight and you read BL, dope. Like, you're reading a queer story, and it's a good story. And I try to lean away from some of the answers that question often gets. Like if you ask it online and stuff like that, like I think that there is a large section of particularly Gen Z right now on things like TikTok and Reels where like they don't understand that like a lot of us didn't have access to queer stories growing up, but they're very focused on the purity of it all. And so if there is a BL that is explicit, they get angry and say it's fetishization. If there is a BL being read by a straight woman, they say that that's fetishization without actually understanding what those terms mean and the actions that make those like applicable. Yeah.
No, totally. I asked in a very open-ended way too, as somebody who, you know, I identify as bi, and I've kind of read all the queer romances over the years, but manga has been, I don't know, it always kind of overwhelmed me as a where to find my starting point, which is why I really loved your lists and I loved following you on Instagram and stuff, because I would see all these recommendations and you'd break it down. And I think my question about, you know, is it still seen as something that's written primarily for straight women? It also just makes me curious, is that just another way for people to demonize things that women are interested in?
Yeah,
you know?
no,
it's really interesting.
Right. Yeah, no, you're completely right. Like that's right on the head. Like that's nail on the head right there. I mean, it's something that's been done a lot of. I mean, it's funny. One of my really good friends, I'll probably send him this podcast so you can listen to it when it comes out. Hi, Matthew. We talk about BL all of the time. We are up to date on like current webtoons and we share them back and forth. And like, there is a clear distinction to talk about like, okay, like this is a perception and sometimes that perception can be harmful. Or I think one of the big ones is like the way that women tend to feminize gay men in an unhealthy way. And I think that those are valid concerns and should be talked about. I've just become very, how do I say it? Because of the state of social media talking, it's very hard to talk about those things in a nuanced way because a lot of times people just want to throw it out because it's women reading it. I mean, like for me, like I don't necessarily identify as bi. I don't know what I am. I just know I'm a squiggly line, not a straight one. I'm somewhere in there.
I feel that.
Yeah. and BL has been a really great way to explore that and read it. And I read a lot of Yuri and I just read stories about love. Like that's really just what I like doing.
No.
Just reading stories about love, whether they're wholesome or smutty, I will read them.
Oh, I'm completely there with you. And every once in a while, I'll try to read a quote unquote serious book. But then I just go back to my romances to the point where, you know, now if I'm reading something, my friend goes, "Oh, are you reading your smut?" I'm like, come on, cut me some slack. There's more to it
The
than that,
answer
too.
is yes, but I have other ones. There's a good story, I promise.
There's more going on to it. But yeah, no, so I've just been curious about your thoughts because it does seem like it's an ever-changing issue. And again, so much of my knowledge of it is from, again, like Sasaki Tomiyano, where one of the main characters is embarrassed to be caught reading it. Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting to see how things have changed, even just over the last couple of years, being able to talk about it in a more public forum of something that people enjoy engaging in. It does seem like it's taken a massive shift. But even you talking about how particularly Gen Z tends to talk about things in kind of virtue signal. It is interesting to see how quickly something like this genre or this medium will be dismissed without ever having the context of the history of it. Not to go too deep into the side stuff, but it's just listening to, I was like taking notes. I was like, this is really interesting. I should know more about this. But yeah, I have, do you think that people just find it easier to watch also some of the like live action shows versus the manga? And I say this as a guilty party because you said that they're getting pretty popular. And recently I was going to order My Love Mix-Up because I saw that one pop up a lot. Yeah. And then I saw it was on Viki and I was like, well, maybe I'll just watch it. And I steamrolled right through it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love that they're being treated like any other manga, like any other webtoon. Semantic Error is another one. I think my only issue with specifically the dramas that come out of Korea and even from Japan is there is a lot of censorship in them because it's no longer on the page. So you'll get more explicit. And when I say explicit, I don't necessarily mean like sexual, but you'll have more explicit intimacy. You'll see a kiss, you'll see a handhold, you'll see a hug, you'll see discussions about sex, and not even just showing the act, but just talking about it and like showing that it happens or like alluding to it happening. That's something that I think is hard when it comes to the anime or live action spaces because of the censorship boards and like what goes into showing something and then finding actors who are it is a very hard thing to say, but there aren't a lot of out queer actors or idols in either country. And so it is very hard as you see these begin to push forward to find the balances of things. And so I always recommend people to read the manga because I think the manga will always have something just a little bit more. But I think that the live actions are really good. Like, was it Cherry Kiss? I think it's Cherry Kiss. But, like, there are just good ones out there. And I think you should take in the content in any way that you want to because the stories are really, really good.
Yeah, and I definitely, there's some that are on my radar, like Our Dining or Our Dining Table.
So good. Yes. Oh, that's such a good manga. Yes. And I can't wait for the live action.
I know. I was trying to find it and I realized it wasn't available, but I'm ordering that one soon because I saw like the mixed media response of it. Or, my sister and I we're going to be checking out another new K-drama one, I think, soon that's, again, been on the lists. But I definitely do want to watch or read the manga because even watching something like My Love Mix-Up, there's just like so many head pats, and I'm like, come on, I understand that it's a high school story, but the intimacy is definitely much different in how you'd see a show between a heterosexual couple. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking right now, I pulled them out, but I've gotten a lot of manga recommendations from your articles. Like I have Monotone Blue that I've been meeting to read for ages. So Travis, I don't know if you want to like segue into some recommendations, but I don't know if The Two Lions was one of your recommendations, but I own one now too. It's just fun to dive into, but I don't know is there like a starting point to you, or is it all about like what genres you're interested in within
I think it's
medium?
I think it's what genres you're interested in manga proper. And then I can usually like give recommendations from that. I think that there are a lot of wholesome ones that if you just like high school romances or slice of life, like you mentioned Two Lions, there's also My Summer of You. I Cannot Reach You from Yen Press and Saki Miyano, both from Yen Press, My Love Mix Up. Like there are really wholesome like Shonen Ai. So Shonen Ai is like shoujo essentially. So Shonen Ai just means it literally means boys love, but you're looking at something that like the most intense it's gonna get is a kiss right at the end of the series and like maybe some hand holding. And then you have just like the from there out of Shonen Ai, then it kind of proliferates into the range of like older teen to like 18 plus. But I always recommend people just go with like what looks familiar. And I'm not going to lie, base stuff on the covers. Like that's how I read. I'm like, oh, this couple looks cute. This setting looks cool. It really just depends. And I have a hard time recommending stuff mainly because I think we're in a space where like I've been reading romance in general as a genre for so long that like some of the more problematic tropes just don't bother me, so I literally read anything. And so it's very hard to kind of understand what to recommend people because I don't know if there are certain things that they don't like. But I think Classmates, if you're looking for a series that is more than a couple of volumes and is complete and is in the wholesome range, but also allows you to grow up with the characters, Classmates is going to be the best one for that because you get to see them go from high school to marriage, and it's really, really cute and really adorable. And then I think if you like vampires, you should read Fangs. There are only 2 volumes out from Tokyo Pop, but the art is gorgeous, the fashion is gorgeous, and it's vampire soulmates. I mean, like, come on.
Yeah, I have Classmates as another one, which had been on my radar actually first because I knew there was a movie adaptation or like a long or an OVA or something. And just as somebody who's always trying to expand my animation knowledge, I had seen it forever and just never been able to find it. And then I kind of slowly realized, oh, it's based on something, you dum-dum. And so I ordered the first one because, again, I've been just so eager to check it out because so many people recommend it just as a film as being one of the best stories. And I've seen enough queer suffering. So to find these wholesome ones is just so nice instead of going and watching something like Banana Fish, which I understand is a classic, but I just don't know if I have it in me.
I think I think restart after coming back home and restart after going hungry. It's one and a sequel. I think that one's really good because it's 2 adults who kind of realize like, oh crap, we both like each other. Oh, how do we do this? What do we do in this small town? Like, and it's really cute. And I think that that's a pull for me with queer romance is specifically the navigation of, you get the will they, won't they, but you also get the, okay, how do I deal with the fact that these feelings may only be what I feel? And how do I find out if that's the truth? How do I extend myself and see where this will go? And then how do we deal with the people around us? And I think that that is something that I really appreciate in how it's handled. And it's not always handled like realistically, but I appreciate how it's handled and getting to see it because they're just complexities of being a human and dealing with things that I think translate really well in the queer stories and specifically in BL. I think that actually, if you're sitting there and you're like, well, I don't feel comfortable reading this because I'm a straight person and I don't think I should be reading queer stories, or if you're like, oh, why is this here? Fujoshis are crazy, I don't ever want to read it. I actually think everybody should read it's both a novel and then it got turned into a manga. It's called Until I Meet My Husband. It is written by Ryosuke Nanosaki, but the art is by Yoshi Sukizuki. And the reason this is important is that Nanasaki is actually one of the foremost advocates for gay rights in Japan. He was one of the people who led toward same-sex marriage legalization, and the manga is an illustrative collection of his essays about his life. And he actually partnered with a BL artist to do the art in the book. And it has an entire forward where they talk about meeting each other and understanding why you would work together, and how BL as a genre, even if it may be off-putting, can actually do some really good work within the gay community and towards helping people see gay men as deserving of love and seeing their romances in a different light. So I think that that's a good one to lead with for people. It's also just like really heartfelt and really good because it's a look into somebody's actual life. So,
speaking again as kind of the listener in all of this, I haven't been talking much because this is so fascinating, and like I said, this is a chance to kind of learn. So that's a great recommendation, because coming from kind of the more mainstream, kind of getting into manga and anime specifically, in a pretty common way, honestly, a lot of these stories just go completely untold in the spaces where I often find myself. So this is excellent stuff to hear. I wanted to ask too, because of that kind of quote unquote mainstreamness and what that actually means, do you think there are still issues with series like these breaking through and becoming a really big smash hit? We had Yuri on Ice a few years ago, and even that, like, despite being extremely popular and well received by most people, had a significant backlash as well. I know the Crunchyroll Awards, it was kind of a sweep, and some people took issue with that. Do you think that's still ongoing in these spaces today? Have we kind of evolved past that, hopefully? What can we do to do that?
Unfortunately, homophobia is always going to exist. It's one of those hard things, is I think anime in and of itself, and I think that there has been a general push from experts from Japan, like exporting Japanese content, specifically speaking about anime and manga, where, having been in some conversations with some distributors and some rights holders, there is a focus on Japan to keep the image a certain way. And so a lot of Japanese companies see pushing their work out there as a risk in and of itself, because you're pushing something that is Japanese to people who are not Japanese. And there was inherent racism that came to a lot of the belittling of Japanese animation, still to this day. I mean, there's a reason that, like, the Oscars doesn't recognize it in the way that it should. There's a reason why I have to fight with everybody on the Hollywood Critics Association to watch, Japanese animated films. And so that's one hurdle. And then you have the other hurdle from that, where now not only is there that element of racism, is now that anime has become mainstream. And I don't want to say that's completely gone, because it is still there. But you also have the other level of bigotry where, like, right now there is a very consistent and pervasive push against queer stories in general, that it kind of, like, that is something that anime doesn't stand apart from. It is something that is happening here. It's happening in other cultures as well. It's happening in Japan. It's happening in Korea. And I think that, like, ultimately that backlash is always going to be there. The question is whether or not a company puts their all into championing a story and pushing it forward. And I think that that's really what the question is, because you're never going to get rid of it. The homophobes are always going to be there, as much as I would like them not to be. But at the same time, what we need are companies who aren't going to back down from telling those stories. I think Trigger, as much as people give them crap, like, Trigger has told multiple queer stories. Kill la Kill is a lesbian story. Promare is a gay story. Mappa has done Yuri on Ice, and if you believe the hype there, they may be the ones between animating Yarichin Beach Club, but that's a that is a conspiracy theory that I will hold on to. But the thing is like we just need we need companies to actually back the stories. So I don't think that the backlash will ever not be there. It's always going to be, but that's what happens when you're telling a story about a marginalized community. It's just whether or not there is investment put into telling those stories. And I can tell you right now, the money that is going into buying from readers is so much that there are webtoons now, and it's not manga, but like there are webtoons now that are coming out of Korea and are instantaneously, the moment they start publishing in a digital platform, are getting picked up for physical publication.
Wow.
Because of the money that is there, because of the number of subscribers. Like there are a lot of stuff that I have in my collection that I have had to fight to find because like it is just out of stock everywhere. And so I think that the appetite for it is there. It's whether or not companies are going to back it. Because in the anime space, we don't have that many. Like we have Sasaki and Miyano, and that's pretty much it, at least last season. And then you just have the quoted characters who may or may not be, and then you kind of just run with it. So yeah, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
No, that does. Because again, I'm kind of looking at this from the perspective of somebody who's very late to this. You mentioned earlier about the perception of women in these spaces reading and writing boys' love stories, but in the spaces where I've grown up, it's a little bit more aggressive than even that, where it is seen as a thing for women, and therefore it's kind of perceived as illegitimate, and that's not really a good thing. And that's kind of what I want there to be a takeaway too for at least our listeners, because again, I don't have demographics, but we started mostly covering shonen manga recaps, so it's a safe assumption that a lot of people are in these similar spaces. Yeah. So I want to hope that people take away from this a desire to want to support these initiatives too. It looks like there's just a growing hunger for it, yes, which is exciting to hear. But I also, like you said, we're Americans. We know what's going on right now. We know that there's a lot of backlash, and I think it would behoove us to, people who fall into my category, again, that kind of safe bubble, where we're not necessarily experiencing that same kind of marginalization, to be aware of these things and support them and learn from them.
Yeah. And I do want to point out too, like if you're listening to this, you're like, oh my god, this queer anime, this is new. Actually, it's not. Like Sailor Moon has multiple trans characters. Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant is a lesbian love story. It's been in anime and manga's DNA because, shocker, queer people exist and queer stories exist, and it's always been there. And I think, to your point, I want people to just embrace them as another, like they are just telling stories. Like that is what it is. At the end of the day, one of the reasons I get so defensive about BL is because you shouldn't purity test something that is putting out more queer stories and more content about queer characters, because at the end of the day, while there may be some like problematic elements to some of the representations, you are still getting to read something about a relationship that isn't heteronormative. And that, like, finding that piece of literature, finding like, and I don't even want to say like Sasaki and Miyano because that's like wholesome, but like what's like finding Coyote. So Coyote is I think it's on volume 4 now. It has a werewolf, and the werewolf clans are hunted by the mafia, and it's really cool. But like there are some questionable stuff that happens in this fantasy story. But the thing is regardless of some of that, like if that is somebody's like, oh, like this is my, oh gosh, am I queer moment? Like that's important. Like being able to read something and start to see it in a different way and feel comfortable questioning the things that you love and the people you love. Like that is why I am always with all of the criticisms that can come to it and all of the assumptions that come with BL. The reason I always supported and championed it is because that first story can be someone's window towards feeling better about themselves and embracing who they really are. And that's why we need them. In the same way we need more Yuri too.
It's also, I mean, maybe not worth noting for people who are really in it and understand like the intricacies of these stories. But like if you are watching or reading, sorry, film guided these days. But if you are like reading other manga or watching other anime and not finding some things questionable in like straight relationships, but finding the same things questionable in, you know, the BL category. I don't know. There's plenty of anime out there where the romance is between a heterosexual man and woman presenting, and it's questionable at best how they do the fan service. So it's like if you find that, if you like, you know, kind of self-evaluate what you're taking issue with and why you're taking issue with it, and usually the result's probably not going to make you feel very good, but use it as a jumping point to kind of explore different genres and mediums. There are so many things that you just said that I like. It just struck a chord. Things from arguing with the HTA about watching, you know, animated films. I did it with my critics group and trying to force everybody to watch Inuo, but also
yes, thank you. That was the one I was campaigning for.
Oh my god, it drove me absolutely nuts having to like. I was like, you guys are missing out on not just the best animated film, but one of the best films, period. Also, subtextually queer film too. That is just amazing. So also knowing that, you know, reevaluating things that you watch that, like you said with Sailor Moon, I never watched that growing up, but like recognizing like, oh, that is telling a whole different subtextual story. Watching Neon Genesis now and understanding the story going on there. But I even have one that I'm trying to check out soon for a piece we're running in June. Princess Knight, which I guess is a genderqueer story from like decades ago, and sure, I
actually know that one.
I assume it didn't age perfectly, but there is significance to it existing at all. So it's just, interesting is the wrong word, but it is kind of what I keep landing on. That it's interesting how we digest things so poorly.
Well, and I think it's one of those things too, is like gender bending is something that is so accepted in shoujo, right? Like Ouran High School Club, like Ouran High School, Tomo-chan as a girl, like gender bending as a concept, and even the idea that these men who are falling in love with these women who are with these girls who are dressed as boys, like that is a queer story. That in and of itself, and it proliferates through shoujo in a way that I think that if most people stopped and looked at these stories through a queer lens, you would see what has been staring you in the face. I will say too, if you like, I have not been reading this my entire life, y'all. Like I started reading BL at the start of the pandemic in 2020 because I watched Given and it made me cry my eyes out because that is one of the most beautiful stories about grief that I think I have ever read and I have ever seen. And the reason that Given, and I think that's a good one to recommend to people because there is a live action on Crunchyroll, the animation is on Crunchyroll, it got dubbed, there's an ongoing manga, like that one is about one character figuring out who he is. The other character has had a boyfriend before, but he's recovering from grief and meeting each other in the middle and finding out the best way to talk to each other. Like, and that was when I started. And so like I've only been reading like BL for, 3 years now, I guess. And a lot of it was because I had those assumptions coming into this that other people did. I also just, in general, felt like I needed to push away pieces of anime that were more adult as well. So when you have a conversation about like, well, the shonen ai is fine, but anything that is deemed yaoi and 18 plus, that's not, because that's sexual and that's bad. And we have to keep anime not that, because people just assume you watch that. It's like, what's wrong with it? There's nothing wrong with it. And once I saw that, I opened the door and I read a whole bunch of stuff. But I think that, like, if you are trying to get into it, I think Crunchyroll has a lot of good offerings. I think Given is one of them. Stranger by the Shore is another. That is an ongoing series currently published by Seven Seas as well in manga.
Oh, cool. I didn't
that's
know
like
that
a 45-minute movie.
Sorry, Stranger by the Shore is one that I watched too, but I didn't know because, again, I'm so focused on like watching it. And
Yeah, no, they have 5 volumes out already. It's good. The story keeps going.
oh, nice. See, I'm adding that to my list. Given was one that I would have also recommended, but they have like a very sporadic publishing schedule, right?
Yeah. Unlike shonen, anything that is not going in a Jump or a shonen like monthly is just, you never know when something's going to get published.
But I also like cut you off really abruptly, so apologies.
No, you're fine. I don't even have any idea what I was going to say. I think that if you're worried about catching up on it now or just opening it now because you haven't read it all your life, that's fine. That's fine. Like, I came into like My Hero at like season 4. Like, you can pick up some BL.
That's just a good lesson for any of this. There's a lot of purists who will, not like content purists, but like you can't skip a JoJo part purists. Mm-hmm. And that's just unreasonable. People come late to things all the time. That's how they become popular.
Tell me about it. That is
there's so much.
Part of the bane of my existence right now is the fact that my husband, 30 years deep into One Piece, read all of it in 2 months after only having read one manga before. So,
and notably, all of that is my fault specifically. But you mentioned too that topics of queerness and gender come up a lot, and since Allie opened the door, I'm gonna push it right open. The last podcast that we recorded with our normal co-host John, we literally had to have like a 10-minute conversation at the end of that podcast about a character who is defined as having she/her pronouns, but identifies as a man in terms of certain presentations and actions. Mm-hmm. And it causes, for listeners, that's Yamato. I'm trying not to spoil too much for Allie here because she still owes Quinn some episodes. But Yamato is a character who identifies as she/her, but refers to herself as a man. She bathes with the men. She behaves, along those lines. And the One Piece community has had the biggest problem in the entire, I've ever seen with anything debated in this community with trying to parse that. And I think a part of that comes from having a background where you can't bridge that gap. I just kind of sum it up as Yamato's or she/her king. It's very easy to grasp once you read it that way. But I think there's a lot of heteronormative thinking that happens in these spaces, and I'm guilty of that in the past. And so I love seeing this conversation happening and being witness to it. And because I think I've learned a lot just now sitting here these past 40 so minutes, just hearing about all these different series. Some of these I've never heard of before, which is not surprising.
But a whole world. You want crime dramas, you want Yakuza, like mafia, like family battles. I got you. Like, it is like BL is as diverse as any other demographic, I guess is the best way to put, like a shoujo, shonen, josei, seinen. Like, it is, like, if you can write it, it's out there. And I think that if we can be accepting of characters that are in One Piece, characters that are in any of our favorite, shonen, we can be accepting of just romances in general and letting that take the focus. We've seen it a lot. I think one of my favorite explorations of queerness in a non-queer piece of media was actually Blue Period, and having that trans character and having our lead go from being a bigoted... Can I cuss on here?
I do accidentally.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I was just going to call him a bigoted little shit, into somebody who understood her and wanted to understand her and wanted to help her. And Blue Period is one of the most, one of the not superhero shonen hits from the demographic, from shonen. And I think that if we can have large subplots with queer characters, then there's nothing stopping you from just taking a chance on a vampire romance and then also seeing some really cool action scenes when you read it. So.
Just have to jump on that and say that we've been rewatching Blue Period in our house, and we just bought a friend the first volume of the manga. So I'm glad that other people really champion this series, because it is such it's so good. And again, like, the queer storyline is so understated, but it's like it's a key point still for like character growth and everything. It's why also, like, I'll talk about this show all the time these days, but like Skip and Loafer having representation through a trans character as well, and being a decent portion of the story in some ways. It's just important to see. And that's why, that was also that I think PA Works has been doing a pretty decent job this year. Like, I know Buddy Daddies wasn't explicitly queer, but it was, there was like elements of queer platonic relationships. I don't know. A lot to recommend and support. I guess my last question is just, is there anything right now ongoing or new that you're reading that like is like your most anticipated for each new volume, or is your list so long that it's kind of hard to hone in on one?
That is a good question. Oh dear. Yeah, it's really hard to hone on one. I will kind of go out of left field and say that it's not BL, but the book that I am the most excited for, because I think it lets people get an understanding of queerness and why somebody would also be into reading BL when they are not a gay man. It's called I Want to Be a Wall. It's published by Yen Press, and it is about two people who have come into a marriage of convenience, and it's platonic. The man is a gay man who can never be with the person that he loves because of society. And the woman is an asexual woman who is also a Fujoshi, loves BL. And they meet each other going on a blind date because of their family. And they develop a really deep friendship and respect for each other that they decide to be each other's spouse in order to get past that societal hurdle that they have to do. And the entire story isn't about, okay, well, now they have to fall in love, or we're going to make them fall in love. The entire story is about them setting their own boundaries. He starts reading BL and learning about it. She starts like realizing, oh, maybe I shouldn't like ship him in real life with the guy that he loves. And it's not a BL explicit story, but it is one that I think allows a reader to see the ways in which people can connect outside of romance, and the ways in which the things that we consume can be a bridge for us and other people. So yeah, I Want to Be a Wall.
The swiftness in which I wrote that title down based on your description, that is like everything I want in a story. It's that kind of dynamic.
It's so good. And it's funny because he's just like, he's very focused on being a good husband, but when he's defining good husband, he's never defining it as sex or love. He's defining being a good husband as being there when she needs him, of making her lunches, of picking her up, of buying her the next volume of her favorite BL. And it's just really cute and really good. It's healing.
And this one's out already, or is it coming out?
It's out already. There are 2 volumes. There should be more coming.
That is going on my order list.
Get on the ground floor of that one now, and you could say you started something. I have a couple more questions. This is a little bit more admin, because first off, you've given us a lot of recommendations. But what I want to ask is, what's the S tier recommendation? What is Kate's number 1 favorite BL story?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I have it. I need everybody reading to understand that this is not a recommendation, because there is some really harsh stuff in this, and it's very hard to read through sometimes. But it's called Twittering Birds Never Fly. It is still ongoing. I think there are 8 volumes out right now, and it is about a Yakuza boss and a man who comes into his life that is significantly younger and is a security guard for him, or a bodyguard for him. to pay off debt, and they wind up having a sexual relationship and not really discussing anything with each other, but there's this wall between them that makes them believe that they will never fully be together, but that's what lets it keep happening because there's not a buy-in. And then one of them kind of breaks and reveals that like that wall actually was a farce and he's just deeply in love with the other one, and then they pull apart, and then you get a time jump. And now they're both their own bosses and they're having to navigate it. And I think that this is one of my favorite BL stories because it is just a good Yakuza story. Like, it is just a good crime drama. But it is also a story about two men who I think widely, and I've talked about this a lot with one of my friends, and like we're kind of very certain that the men themselves are not gay, but there is something that happens within the organization of the Yakuza that like makes this relationship happen the way that it does. And it's just a really complex and nuanced story, and it's really sad. And it's a really melancholy story that really just explores the pressures and trauma that people go through, and how even if you're connecting with somebody and you want to move forward, sometimes that's just not possible. And sometimes the romance actually kills the connection because you need that space. So yeah, it's a really weird one, and I always feel weird when people ask me because it's not one that I would necessarily recommend because there are like quite a few trigger warnings going into it. But I think that it is just a beautifully written story. Yeah, I think that would be my favorite, and then like something that is accessible after that would probably be Given, which I've already mentioned.
Yeah, I just love hearing people talk about the things that they love the most. Not necessarily as a recommendation, but just it's nice to talk about the things that we love the most, and not just criticism. So that's great. I have another. This is absolutely just admin, but over the course of several episodes of our show now, John has asked me what is my favorite anime of the season currently. And I have not been able to give a straight answer to that. So since I have not had the chance to talk about this with Ali either, I am throwing it out to both of you. Of the spring season of this year, do you have a favorite series?
Hell's Paradise.
That was so fast. I love that. It's so good. It's so good, isn't it?
So it's also easy too because it's one of my favorite manga that I've ever read.
It is the favorite manga of who we have reviewing it for In Between Drafts, Kayla. She was actually on the show talking about it too. And reading her reviews of it has been great. If you haven't, listeners, I highly recommend going and giving those a read through. But I have been just in awe of what it actually is about because I went in completely blind and I was like, oh, there's a lot going on here. This is excellent.
Yeah, it's definitely addictive. We went to watch the new episode and we're disappointed to see that there wasn't a new one this week. But I do love Hell's Paradise, but my favorite, because I'm just a sucker for slice of life, is I really, really love Skip and Loafer. But the only other one that's like battling for that position is Heavenly Delusion, which is maybe the only one I've watched this year where I've actually like yelled out loud while watching due to some of the body horror and kind of really tricky science fiction elements of it all. So it's a very two opposing in terms of like genre and tone, but yeah, Skip and Loafer and Heavenly Delusion are the two where like everything else needs to wait. I need to watch the new ones. As Kate would know, as I've given many 10 out of 10s.
Oh yeah, and I don't blame you. It's amazing. So
yeah, see that's been my dilemma: is how am I supposed to pick a best one? Like those two in particular, especially thematically, they deal with a lot of similar things, despite being entirely different genres and situations. And I love them both so much. And there's been so many good things. So I haven't even watched Skip and Loafer yet, and Ali won't get over that at all. It's I don't even know how I'm going to find the time to watch everything this season, and we're coming up on summer.
Have you watched Oshinoko?
Oh shit, yes. That one too.
Yep, that one's way up there for me.
Oh, it's so good.
That one That one's great. I'm gonna remember that one forever because it's one of the few that have broken the number one spot on my anime list, and that is always the number one. It makes me want to go watch it because it must be good. But for two, I love seeing people scramble to get Full Metal Alchemist back on top. It is the funniest thing in the anime community. Period. And that first episode, that's an episode.
It's so good.
Oh my gosh.
I'm so happy they did that. Like, I was worried they were going to stretch it out. I'm happy they just did a mega episode and we're like, we're going to do it now.
Because they would have lost people. And I get why, I think, but watching the whole thing and getting the whole like emotional through line throughout all of it, it adds a layer of like just an emotional gut punch that I think if they had broken it up, we would have lost too, even for the people who did stick around. But yeah, I'm addicted to that one. I can't believe I keep forgetting that one. And I think it's because I went into the season not anticipating it being a favorite, but it is. It's so good.
It's not on Crunchyroll, so it's harder to remember too. Let's be honest here. This is a part of it.
Sure, but my number one of like the last season was also on High Dive with Sunray. So
that's true. That's true.
Build the audience.
Oh yeah, no, I pay my High Dive subscription. You better believe it. I'm not letting that go. Well, Kate, we mentioned it at the top, but you are the editor-in-chief of butwhythough.net. Is there anywhere else that people can find you? Anything you want to plug while we have you?
You can just find me over on Twitter at omamithrandir. It's where I spend my most time and talk the most. So that is, that's there. You can check out our podcast, But Why Though, on all of your RSS feeds. We cover, it's bi-weekly, and we cover a different topic each week. This last week, I was on there talking about whether or not reviews are worth it, and whether people read them. So it's a pretty good listen. So, yeah.
We will have those in the show notes as well when this episode goes live. So, awesome. Great resources, and please support the site. Also, just a little bit more admin since I didn't get it at the top. We do want to hear from you, the audience. Of course, we have an email address. That's rookiepirateradio@gmail.com. You can always send us notes, feedback. If you tried any of the suggestions that were brought up this episode, or the ones that weren't suggestions but sound good anyway, we'd love to hear your feedback on that. And if you really want to talk with us, the best way to do that is to join us on Discord. We have a Discord server. You'll find that in the show notes as well. We're in there every single day talking about different things, and it's not just an anime-focused Discord. It's the Discord for the entire In Between Drafts team. So you'll find everything from film reviews to TV reviews, discussions of books, music, and more. There's always something going on in there, and more exciting things being planned for the future. So please join us there, and let's talk a little bit about these series, because I will be trying out a few of them myself. Thank you for joining us, Kate. This has been an absolute pleasure. I very much appreciate you spending your time with us. And for the listeners, we will see you again soon.